Not about what you have done or what you can do, but simply by grace. Now, we're familiar with the story of Joseph, right? Are we?
Yes. Yes.
You've heard of that, the story of Joseph.
Yes.
And we know in Genesis chapter 37, that's where the story starts. Genesis chapter 37 and ends at Exodus chapter 50. Genesis chapter 37 starts with Joseph being the favorite child of Jacob, and the siblings were jealous towards Joseph. That one day they wanted to kill him, and he was begging at the pits. They wanted him to die, and they were pleading. Joseph was pleading, but it fell on deaf ears. And one of the siblings said, instead of killing him, let's just sell him. Right? Let's just sell him. At least we earn money. And eventually he was carted off in Genesis chapter 37. And the story continues in Genesis chapter 39. If you remember, in Genesis chapter 39, Joseph ends up in the house of whom? Potiphar, right?
Yeah.
Now, the thing that is, if you've read the Genesis, or you've studied the life of Joseph, you know before Genesis chapter 39 is Genesis chapter 38, right? And there, Genesis chapter 38 comes out like a sore thumb. Because here, we see the life of Judah. Now, we know Judah is the daughter of Leah, not Rachel. Leah, the original wife of Jacob. Remember, Jacob loved Rachel so much, he served Laban, and on the night of their wedding, he was tricked into marrying Leah, the old. Word Leah means ugly, cross-eyed girl eh. Parang ganon. So medyo pangit si Leah. Oh, wait. My internet is unstable. Let me check my connection. Am I back?
Wait.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I'm back. That's the thing, right? Jacob marries Leah, then had to serve again to marry Rachel, the one that he really loved. But because of that, Jacob had several kids with Leah. In fact, what happened when Jacob and his family left the land, because Esau wanted to kill Jacob because Jacob stole the birthright, right?
Yes.
Esau wanted to kill Jacob, and there was news that Jacob wanted peace already. So what happened is Jacob went back to meet Esau, but because he loves Rachel, what he did is he divided his caravan. The first batch will be Leah and her kids, so that if something terrible will happen, if Esau becomes very angry, the first group that will be slaughtered will be Leah and the kids. The next will be Rachel and Joseph and the other kids. Now, try to imagine this. You are Judah, right? With your mom, Leah. Wouldn't you be wondering, Mom, why are we here in front? Right? It's parang pakain ba?
Pain.
Pain, right? Pain.
Yeah.
Because that was really the intent of Jacob. That if something happens bad, they die, at least Rachel and her kids can still escape. So you can imagine how Leah and her kids, including Judah, would feel. Now we're looking at Genesis chapter 38. Why don't we go there? And Robert, can you read verse 1?
And it came about at that time that Judah departed from his brothers and visited a certain Adulamite, whose name was Hira.
Yeah. Unlike Jacob, Jacob left the promised land by force, went into slavery. Here, Judah went out on his own. It was his own volition. So there's a contrast already. How Jacob left and how Judah left. Joseph left by force, sold to slavery. Judah left by choice, right? And he went to the Canaan lands. Look, you'll see that in verse 2. Hazel, can you read verse 2?
There Judah met the daughter of a Canaanite man named Shua. He married her and made love to her.
Yeah. Judah saw and took, right? When you look at scriptures, you will see Eve saw the fruit and she took it. In Genesis chapter 6, Genesis chapter 6, right? The Son of God saw the daughters of men and took it. Pharaoh saw Sarah and took her. Shechem saw Dinah and took her. So the idea here is that when Judah saw the girl, the Canaanite girl, and took her, he did not take her in a romantic way. He did not romance. He did not court her. He took her. In a sense, it was kind of brazen. That's how he got the wife. Now, sorry. After getting that, they got married basically and had kids. Look at verse 3. Bettina, can you read verse 3?
Oh, sorry, which chapter?
Genesis chapter 38.
Verse 3. So she conceived and bore a son, and he named him Er.
Who conceived? The wife, right? She conceived and bore a child named what, Bettina?
Er.
Do you know the meaning of the word In Hebrew, if you read it backward, it means evil. In Tagalog, parang demonyo. I mean, why would you want to name your kid such? Right? But it seems descriptive. Go now to verse 4 and 5. Monica, can you please read that? Genesis 38, verse 4 and 5.
She conceived again and gave birth to a son and named him Onan. She gave birth to still another son and named him Shelah. It was a Kezib that she gave birth to him. At Kesed. It was at Kesed that she gave birth to him.
Now, Monica, it was instructed to the people of God not to marry, not to intermarry with the Canaanites. Why? Because they're pagans. God chose a group of people to be His own, separated, so that people may see them as the chosen people of God. And not to intermarry. Dito, he intermarried and had several kids. So, as you can see, 3 kids. What does it mean? Matagal na siya sa Canaan. To have 3 kids eh. He was there for quite some time, and we'll find out later that he was really there for quite some time. Look at verse 6, Anthony. 6 and 7, please.
Genesis 38 also, right?
Yes.
Judah gave a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death.
Yep. True to form, right? True to form to his name. He was called Demonio, and God said, I took his life because he was evil. Now, married whom? Tamar, correct?
Tamar, yeah.
Now, in your knowledge, and this is just a guesstimate, how old would Tamar be? How old do women get married at that time?
Teens.
Correct? At puberty.
Yeah.
So about 13 or 14. So you can imagine, Tamar was very, very young when she became a widow. Maybe 13, 14, maybe max 15. Right? She's a widower at a very young age. And that ain't good during that time if you're a widow. In fact, until the time of Jesus, if you're a widower, the tendency is either you end up as a prostitute or you would be begging in the streets. That's why, diba, when Jesus met this woman in John chapter 4, right? The husband that you are with is not your husband, and I think she married 5 times, because you really have to marry and marry. Because if a widower stays alone, that's a problem. That's why Jesus said, right? Take care of children and widows. Because sila talaga ang kawawa. Children and widows. Now, Bambi, I think your turn. Verse 8, please.
Verse 8.
Yes.
Then Judas said to Onan, "Go into your brother's wife and perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her, and raise up offspring for your brother."
Because Bambi, during that time, there's a law. It's called the Levirate law. Now, the Levirate law instructs, because alam nga natin if a girl loses her husband, man, that's a big problem, right? So it's the second brother should marry the widow, especially if the widow is childless. So that law requires them to marry. The surviving brother need to marry the widow in order to continue the lineage of the elder brother, right? It's intended to perpetuate the memory of the deceased husband and alleviate poverty for the wife. You got that?
Yes.
Now, it's Luis, right? Is that right?
Luisa. Luisa.
Luisa.
Yeah.
I'm really off by the way. So
Sorry.
verse 9, please, Luisa.
Verse 9. Okay, hold on. And Onan knew that the seed should not be his. And it came to pass when he went unto his brother's wife that he spilled it on the ground, lest that he should give seed to his brother.
You know, the eldest brother, right, who died, as a firstborn, he's entitled, right, to get double inheritance. Firstborn, eh? Now, now that he's dead, we saw the liberate law requires the second brother, Onan, to marry, kumbaga, her sister-in-law. The thing there is this. If Tamar gets pregnant by Onan, the child is not Onan's.
It's
The
hers.
child is hers. The eldest brother still. That's why the inheritance does not go to the brother. It will go to the son of as the firstborn of the firstborn. You understand what I'm saying? Or
Yes.
So that's why now if Tamar cannot still give birth, right, and remains really childless, the firstborn, right, goes now to the brother in case Tamar does not give birth. That's why it says here, Onan wasted his seed. And says he does not want to give an offspring to his brother.
Mm-mm.
Because at the end of the day, he wants the inheritance. Right?
Yeah.
So that he gets the privilege. He was willing to erase the legacy and memory of his brother. So Onan had no intention of getting Tamar
pregnant. Yeah.
Now, if you note in verse 9, it says, so when he went into his brother's wife, the wording there is that he went. Who has an NIV version? Does anyone have an NIV version here? Can anybody check? Anthony, your NIV? Oh, can you please read verse 9?
Yeah. Verse 9.
Yeah.
But Onan knew that the child would not be his. So whenever he slept with his brother's wife, he spilled his semen on the ground to keep from providing offspring for his brother.
So Anthony, you saw that word, whenever. What that means is he was always going to the wife. So he was using Tamar as a sex slave without any intent of really impregnating her. Right? It was only for sexual gratification. And he would do it repeatedly, regularly, whenever is what the idea there. Medyo salbahe. Salbahe si Onan, right? That's why in verse 10, Rowie, Rowie Cordon, can you please read that?
And what he did was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and he put him to death also.
Siyempre, alam ni God, no? God knows. He knows every secret. Nothing can be hidden from God. He knew that Onan was just abusing Tamar. He knew that Onan had no intent in trying to sorry, has no intent in trying to impregnate and make the memory of his brother last. He knew that Onan,
Close it.
yeah, he knew that Onan wanted to get really the inheritance. So God deemed it to be evil. You know, the last time God put people to death was in Sodom and Gomorrah. And that was a group of people, right? This was the first time in Scripture that God's judgment fell against specific individual. And Onan. It's so funny. Judah, the father-in-law, tried to deceive his dad, right? Jacob, into telling Jacob that his favorite son, Joseph, was dead. In reality, he was not dead. Now God puts to death, legitimately puts to death two of his sons. Oh, irony of ironies. Verse 11. Erwin, can you please read that? Genesis 38, verse 11. All right. Okay, let's go first to Anton.
Sorry. Nakamute pala. He was
Okay.
reading already.
All right. Sorry.
Okay.
Verse 11.
11. Then Judah said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, "Remain a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up." For he thought, "I am afraid that he too may die like his brothers." So Tamar went and lived in her father's house.
Yeah. Now, Erwin, ano bang basa mo dyan kay Judah, the father-in-law?
Ano lang, siguro parang sabi niya malas, namamatay yung mga pag pinapakasalan ni Tamar, namamatay yung mga sons niya. So, yun. So sabi na lang niya, just live na lang for here in our house.
No, not in their house.
Her father's house pala, sorry. Doon sa, bumalik siya sa father niya.
Ano yun, Erwin? Nakakahiya yun. Dapat siya mag-alaga eh. Kapamilya na niya eh. Sabi niya, hindi kita kapuso. Alis. Doon ka muna sa daddy mo. You know, I think nakwento ko sa iyo, no? Yung mami ko, my mom had a friend. And the first husband died. Okay. Married again. The second husband died. I don't know the first husband. I don't know the second husband. But when my mom saw them, I met the friend of my mom and the third husband. Knowing the story, you know what I told the third husband? Good luck. Kasi first husband died, second husband died. Guess what? He died too. Huh?
Wow.
What?
Oh.
Wow.
I was saying it like joke, right? But apparently, well, I don't know if maybe patay na rin yung friend ng mami ko by now, no? But but same. Si Judah, sabi niya, intay lang. I gave you my first, namatay. I gave you my second, namatay. Alang ang ibigay ko yung third ko. Ubos ang anak ko. Right? I wouldn't. And he has an excuse. That my son Sheila needs to grow up. He's still young. He's still not in the marrying age. In the meantime, go back to your dad. Right? Now, that's sabi ko nga, nakakaya yun. Everybody would know. Oh, why are you living back with your parents? What went wrong? Right? That's, imagine if you're Tamar, you've been sexually abused by Onan, you've been widowed twice, and now the society knows that the family of Jacob kind of rejected you. For Judah, that's a bad father-in-law for you there. Verse 12. Chicky, can you please read verse 12 to 13?
Okay. Now, after a considerable time, Shua's daughter, the wife of Judah, died. And when the time of mourning was ended, Judah went up to the sheep shearers at Timnah, he and his friend Hira the Adulamite. It was told to Tamar, behold, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep.
Chiki.
Yeah.
What is shearing of sheep?
Yung tinatanggal yung wool.
Wool.
Shaving.
Correct. Yeah, shearing sheep. I remember seeing one yung shearing of sheep. But what happens during sheep shearing? Would you know?
Celebration.
Yes. Yeah. It's party time.
There you go.
It's like spring break. Wherein college students would want to go to Florida for their spring break, right? It's time to celebrate. Now, the thing here is that apparently Judah has a reputation, right? He has a reputation for his sexual appetite. That's why it was said, it was told, behold, your father-in-law is going to Timnah to shear his sheep. Parang common knowledge yung kanyang sexual appetite. That's why Tamar devised a plan. Look at the plan, Anton. Can you please read verse 14?
Verse 14. So she took off her widow's garments and covered herself with a veil and wrapped herself and sat in an open place which was on the way to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah was grown and she was not given to him as a wife.
Right. Anton, try to imagine if you are Tamar. Okay, you went back to your father, right? Medyo na-ship out ka dun. And what are you waiting for, Anton? According to Jacob?
Shelah to mature.
Correct? And you are waiting. Months, maybe years, I do not know. The Bible is silent. But you were waiting, you were observing, then you notice, wow, he's now grown up. Kumbaga, now you're waiting for the phone call from your father-in-law. What happened here, Anton?
He was passed over. The Shelah wasn't given to her as a husband.
Yeah. Did not. It never came. Clearly, Judah deceived Tamar. Right? Clearly, it seems Judah had no intention of fulfilling his promise. Right? Judah was 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 not a man of his own word. He had no intention. Knowing that, nung na-realize to ni Tamar, sabi niya, that's it. I'll devise a plan. He's going sheep shearing, right? I know my father-in-law so well. I know what I'll do. What did he do, Anton?
Sorry, Bob. Tumawag mom ko.
Okay. No problem.
What was the question again?
What was the device that Tamar did?
She used a veil to hide her identity.
Right.
She pretended to be a prostitute.
Correct. Go read 15 to 16. Alan, can you read Genesis 38, 15 to 17? Sorry.
15?
Yes, verse 15 to 17.
When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face, not realizing that she was his daughter-in-law. He went over to her by the roadside and said, "Come now and let me sleep with you." And
17.
What will you give me to sleep with you? She asked. Should I go on?
Yeah, up to 19, please.
All right. I'll send you a young goat from my flock. He said, "You give me something as a pledge until you send it," he asked. He said, "What pledge should I give you?" "Your seal and its cord and the staff in your hand," she answered. So he gave them to her and slept with her. She became pregnant by him. After she left, she took off her veil and put on those clothes again.
So, true enough, Judah was sheep shearing, right? And he has this reputation. And Tamar said, if I just go to the street where my father-in-law passes by, I know he'll fall for me. True enough, he fell for her. And what did Tamar ask? Leave me your signet cord. Leave me your staff as a down payment. Basically sinabi, leave me your wallet. You know that signet, the signet with the cord, that's the like a signet ring or a signet stamp wherein documents are sealed so that you know that this document came from this man. It gives his identity. So, and he had his staff, which is a sign of authority. In a sense, what Tamar requested was his wallet with his driver license and his credit card. His identity was all there. Now, and she got pregnant. Judah impregnated her. So you see this Judah, right? He's a schemer to the point that he did not care to deceive his dying father, his blind father. He had no heart to rescue Joseph. He was one of the brothers that put him on the well to die, despite pleading. Judah was the man who betrayed his daughter-in-law. Judah was the man that goes with his instinct, his fleshly inclination, and slept with a prostitute. Man, ain't a good example, right? Judah is. Verse 20. Ricky.
Verse 20. Meanwhile, Judah sent the young goat by his friend, the Adullamite, in order to get his pledge back from the woman, but he did not find her.
Verse 21.
He asked the men who lived there, "Where is the shrine prostitute who is beside the road at Enaim?" "There hasn't been any shrine prostitute here," they said.
Imagine, Ricky. I mean, Judah wanted to keep his obligation, right? To a prostitute, but not his obligation with his daughter-in-law. Paloko rin talaga siya, no?
Yep.
Not only that.
He just wanted this signet ring back.
Oo. And what do you notice in verse 21, Robert? Ricky, verse 21. Where is the what daw?
Prostitute, the shrine, prostitute.
The temple prostitute.
Shrine prostitute, yeah.
Yeah. Kasi during that time, there are temple prostitutes and there are the normal prostitutes. A temple prostitute is people, men, will go to the temple and get a prostitute and have sex so that their harvest will be fertile.
Wow.
Oo, loko rin. Pero si Judah, parang pinasasabi niya, alam mo, hindi man regular prostitute ang kinuha ko, temple yan. Ang kind of worshipping pa. But he did not go to the temple, right? He just got Tamar on the street as a regular prostitute.
Oh, okay.
So in a sense, nagmamalinis pa siya eh. Naghahanap siya ng temple prostitute. Kaya pumunta siya sa temple, wala nga doon, hindi man siya temple prostitute. And he knew that. Feeling ko nagpapabango lang siya ng sarili para kung ito na nga, nahuli. Hindi naman ganun kasama. Kasi nga, I'm offering this to the fertility gods so that my sheep will be more fertile and they will be more bountiful, or my crops will bring forth a better harvest.
Justifying his sin.
Justifying his sin, in a sense, pangalawa nun, nasa Canaan siya, dapat wala siya doon. Kaya nga mga pagan practice to eh. Panay kabalbalan eh. Right? But ano siya? Booking. There was no temple. Parang ang dating nga is, walang ganun dito ah. Ang nakuha pa talaga, totoong prostitute. And he couldn't find her. Now, go to verse 22 and 23. Rowie, are you there?
Yep.
So he went back to Judah and said, I didn't find her. Besides, the men who lived there said there hasn't been any shrine prostitute here. Then Judah said, let her keep what she has, or we will become a laughing stock. After all, I did send her this young goat, but you didn't find her.
Yaman na. Diba? Rowie, yaman na. Nawala yung credit card ko, i-report na lang.
Yeah.
Diba? Magpa-issue na lang. Yung prostitute run away with my signet ring, no? I-report na lang sa office na credit card missing para okay na. Let's move forward from this situation and pass is pass. Right? Now verse 24, George. George, you hear me?
About 3 months later, someone told Judah. Can you hear me, Bob?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
About 3 months later, someone told Judah, your daughter-in-law Tamar has been acting like a whore, and now she is pregnant. Judah ordered, take her out and burn her to death.
Wow! 3 months has passed. Nakalimutan na yun to, right? Maybe, George, baka inisip niya, wala na to, wala na sabit. You know, then one day, nabalitaan niya, yung daughter-in-law ko, prostitute pala, buntis. Clearly not from my son, right? Kaya ayoko bigay yung son ko eh. Now, anong ginawa niya, George? Nagpa-investigate ba? None, di ba?
Wala.
Wala. Inabas yan, sunugin nyo. Wow. Without even asking, without even investigating. What hypocrisy, right? Judah was willing to sleep with a harlot, but condemns her daughter-in-law, which he believes that she was one. Si Judah, mabilis eh. Ganun ba? She's pregnant? Papatay na natin yan. Allowed naman yan eh. Because he wants to get rid of her. Para yung kanyang youngest son, baka yung youngest son, Dad, I want to marry na. Hindi pwede, nandiyan pa si Tamar eh. Right? Dad, paano ba to? Wala, maghintay tayo. Now there's an opportunity. Right? For them to dispose of Tamar. Because she's pregnant. The dilemma now of Judah has been resolved. His family now can survive. His youngest son now can marry. Tamar now will be condemned. Yet Judah was blind by his own sin. Bring her out to the city gates and burn her to death, for she has committed adultery. Grabe. Going back to verse 25, Hazel. Hazel, are you there? All right.
Sorry, ayan.
Okay. Verse 25.
As she was being brought out, she sent a message to her father-in-law. I am pregnant by the man who owns these, she said. And she added, see if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are.
Wow.
Oh.
The time has come for Tamar to execute her plan. To expose the hypocrisy of Judah. And sabi niya what? Please examine and see. Kumbaga, dinadala na siya sa gate, no? Papatayin niya. Sabi niya, hintay lang ngayon. Hintay lang, please. Hintay lang. Please examine. You know, it's so interesting. That was the exact words of the brother of Joseph. When they told their father, please examine this coat of Joseph who was devoured by the animals. When that word was last used in Genesis chapter 37, the please examine was meant to put a lie on Jacob. But now here Tamar, when she used that word, please examine, it is to expose a lie that Judah was trying to promulgate. Now, sabi niya, pakita niya to. Because itong batang to, ang tatay nito, yung may-ari nito eh. Imagine when Judah told the men to put Tamar to death, he did not realize that he was saying that put my son, kasi anak niya yun eh, hindi niya alam eh. put to death also. O, ito na nga yun. Verse 26, Robert.
Judah recognized them and said, "She is more righteous than I, inasmuch as I did not give her to my son Shelah, and he did not have relations with her again."
Yeah. Here, Judah confessed and says, she is more righteous than I. In some version, it says, she is more righteous, not I. And he confessed his sins. Right? Judah recognizes his own guilt, that he lied to Tamar. She denied her the right to his protection when Onan died, and instead threw her off to his father. He now admits that it is his child, that indeed she was not a prostitute. Think of how it must have been for Judah, right? Being caught. He was feared. He feared that people might mock him. Now, the cat is out of the bag by this revelation. Now, realize that these events in Genesis chapter 38, right? These events took place in a span of 20 to 23 years.
Oh.
This, from the time Judah left the covenantal promise of the covenantal family of Jacob and went to Canaan, to a place wherein he should not have gone, married a Canaanite, was a very bad father, that his two sons, right, was put to death by God himself, who tried to deprive Tamar her right? 20 to 23 years of deception and blindness. But this story tells me what? God can and God does crack the hearts of hardened people. God can and God does reclaim the biggest sinner. Right? Like Judah. Judah was a slave trader. He sold his brother Joseph. He turned his back from Abraham's line, Jacob. He was callous towards his father. Because his father grieved. Right? He failed as a father himself, raising up two sons that God declared wicked. He was a fornicator, an adulterer, who was quick to condemn. But can I tell you something? Why I find this passage amazing? Judah was the promised seed. Judah was the promised seed. If you would compare the life of Judah and the life of Joseph, who do you think should be the promised seed? Who do you think should be the line of Jesus? Judah or Joseph? Joseph. When Joseph entered into the family of Potiphar, and Potiphar's wife tried to seduce him. He ran away. But Judah, siya pa naghanap. Imagine. This is why grace is amazing. For all intents and purposes, to me, Joseph should be the line. He was quote-unquote faithful. Right? He was obedient. If not for his brothers selling him into slavery, he would have remained in the promised land. Right? Not Judah. But Judah, God chose. Verse 27. 27 to 29. Bettina? Exodus 38, verse 27, 29, Bettina. We can't hear you now. I can't hear you.
Sorry.
Yeah, there. I can hear you now.
Which chapter? Exodus.
No, Genesis chapter 38. Still the same, Anna.
Hello.
Bambi, why don't you read Genesis chapter 38, verse 27 to 29?
Okay. 27 to 29.
Yes.
When the time of her labor came, there were twins in her womb. And when she was in labor, one put out a hand, and the midwife took it and tied a scarlet thread on his hand, saying, "This one came out first." But as he drew back his hand, behold, his brother came out, and she said, "What a breach you have made for yourself." Therefore his name was called Perez.
Yeah. Up to 30 na.
Afterwards his brother came out with a scarlet thread on his hand, and his name was called Zerah.
Yeah. You know what's so interesting, no? Eventually, the kid of Judah lost two sons. Now, in a sense, God gave them back through Tamar. Right? As if it was a new start. And now the line will now proceed from the kids of Tamar. Do you realize that the grandparents of Jesus is Judah, a sinner, and Tamar, a prostitute? No wonder Jesus likes hanging with sinners and prostitutes eh. Lolo pala niya yun eh. Lolo niya at lola niya, ganun. Right? Go to Matthew chapter 1. Matthew chapter 1 verse 2. 2 to 3. Monica, can you please read that?
What verse, Bobby?
Matthew 1 verse 2 to 3.
Okay. Abraham was the father of Isaac. Isaac the father of Jacob. Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers. Judah the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. Perez the father of Hezron. Hezron the father of Ram.
Yeah. Imagine si Tamar's name is etched in the genealogy of Jesus. Amazing! Right? And sabi ko nga the story of Judah and Tamar is an encouragement to all of us sinners in need of a Savior. It only shows that salvation is the workings of God. It shows that God never gives up on His people. Right? Anthony, I think I can hear you.
I'm sorry.
No problem. And that God keeps His promise. The redemptive story of God does not hinge, praise God, on the faithfulness of His people, but on the faithfulness of God. Right? Buti na lang. Now, you remember why Joseph went? Do you realize why Joseph went to Egypt? Joseph went to Egypt in order to protect Judah. The brother that sold him into slavery. Walang hiya talaga tong brother na to si Judah. And di ba sa Genesis chapter 50, what man intended for evil, God meant it for good. The faithfulness of Joseph, right? His sufferings in prison, right? That story from 39, Genesis 39 to 50. By the way, that 20 to 23 years that Judah was having a splendid time was Genesis 30 to 50. While Joseph was being faithful in Egypt to protect Judah, Judah naman was in Canaan having a good time. Yet God chose Judah. It is by grace you have been saved through faith and not of your works. Exhibit A, Judah. Judah was a great example because for all intents and purposes, he is not qualified. He does not deserve to be the line wherein the seed of the Redeemer would pass through. Masyadong makasalanan Yet, by His sovereign will, God chose it to pass through Judah. That, to me, is the marvelous concept of grace. Not because of your will, but because of His will. Not because you are good, but because He is good. Not because you are faithful, but because God is faithful. My job, our job, is just to be grateful that despite all of us, we are Judas. Judah and Judas. What's Judas in Tagalog? Judas, right? Judas. We're both Judah and Judas. But only by grace we've been saved. Thus says the Lord. Amen and amen.